Thank you, Jeffries, and thank you, James, and welcome to this 30-minute session on digital priorities for the transatlantic relationship. Because time is exceedingly short, I will introduce our speakers extremely briefly, but there's no sign of disrespect, so please do not take that personally. We have, as you will see from the program, Pilar del Castillo, chairwoman of the European Internet Foundation, and probably the most active member of the European Parliament on digital technology issues since her election to the Parliament back in 2004. And then, at least for the next half hour, we have a newly elevated member of the Congress in the shape and form of Tyson Barker, whose real job, of course, is director of the Tech and Foreign Policy Program of the German Council on Foreign Relations. But because Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy is unable to join us, he's going to role play being a congressperson for the next half an hour. We're going to talk about digital, my panel. You heard from Danuta earlier saying that we have to be very truthful to each other, both sides of the Atlantic. We've had frictions and disputes and tensions in the past, but we also have to find new ways to solve old problems. And we should focus, says Danuta, on digital transformation. Wendy also, though, reminded us that digital will be more difficult than some policy areas, but absolutely critical. So my question, Pilar, over to you, and please unmute.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the TPN for inviting me to this debate. To tell you the truth, I mean, after the debate we had with Wendy Sherman, is probably no need for coming back again to the digital field. I am really happy to have from her, although she was very explicit that she was not speaking on behalf of Biden's administration, but it's a matter of new taste, new feeling, how things can go on. And it's also very interesting when she mentioned that we are not anymore in 2016. And this is very clear in terms of how much this digital field has been upgraded. If we think in the TTIP at the beginning and at the end, the space for digital practically was no one. I mean, and now the Commission in the proposal for having a new proposal from the Commission for a new transatlantic agenda, it includes this specific space for digital dialogue. And this just is a matter reflecting what had happened in the digital field in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, it's absolutely different, the situation in which we are now. And together with this, I must say that the COVID-19 experience, the pandemic, has acted as a kind of big lens in which you can see the need for accelerating the digital transformation. And that sensitivity is everywhere. It is here, and it is also in the United States and many other places. So all together, we are in a very unique situation to tackle, to approach all these different aspects of digital that, as you mentioned, yes, I mean, it was, the views are different in many aspects, but still, there's much more in common than it was at the beginning. So 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but for sure, even the last 4 years. And not only that, there is an increasing need to really join forces beyond our own regional area, so the European Union and the United States. Many of the aspects has been mentioned by either Wendy or for some speakers that many of them also mentioned the digital part. So there is no doubt, and it is in the proposal of the European Council that a number of things for European Union is, must be there from the very beginning. We are talking about responsibility of online platforms and big techs in many different aspects, but also when in tackling harmful market behavior, illegal content, or algorithm-fueled propagation of hate speech and disinformation. Regarding fair taxation is another aspect which is quite critical for the European Union, also for the United States. So I believe that the EU and the US should strongly commit to the timely conclusion and discussions on a global solution within the context of OECD and G20. But having said that, there is also a need to be innovative, to have an innovative approach on this if we want to really succeed. And accordingly, this was not specifically mentioned, the only thing that was not mentioned maybe so precisely in the last debate, but in my view, it is imperative to discuss, to exchange views on data governance and see how this can be overcome. Consequently, we must move up a gear and intensify our cooperation, at bilateral, of course, in a multilateral level as well, to promote regulatory convergence and facilitate free data flow, which is essential for an economy of data. And that must be, developed in a context of trust on the basis of high standards and safeguards. Likewise, the development of trustworthy artificial intelligence implies that efforts are made in both sides of the Atlantic. I mean, the many approaches are different somewhere to some extent, and we have to do it towards ensuring a human-centric and transparent approach to AI. In this context, the EU proposal that we must start to work on a transatlantic AI agreement to send a blueprint for regional and global standards, I think must be very welcome step. But all in all, I must say that if we look at the global and extremely fast digital transformation, the challenge today is not just about restoring the transatlantic relationship, but about transforming it. This is a key piece of our mindset here and there that we have to maintain and to make it visible. I mean, something that we must really transform according to the expectation. The situation we were before is totally different, and the urgency as well. So that will be my final, let's say, message. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pilar. A lot of food for thought there. We'll come back to that, I'm sure, when the discussion gets off after we've now heard from Tyson. Welcome, Tyson, our congressperson for the next 30 minutes. You know a lot about this topic. Do you share the same broad confidence as Pilar has expressed and other speakers before about sufficient common ground on the regulatory agenda?
Well, thanks for the invitation, Paul, Vivian, and others, and I'm delighted for this promotion to congressman. I will take the title and run with it. The most surprising thing, I joined at the end of Wendy Sherman's talk, but hearing Wendy Sherman talk about the Communications Decency Act is quite a new development, I think you could say, for Washington to have her talk about intermediary liability safe harbors. This just shows you that these digital issues are really kind of seeping into the pores of the political agenda also in Washington. And I think there's a lot of convergence on 4 issues in particular where they're really high on the list of the US-EU agenda, digital agenda, and they're being pushed very quickly in Brussels right now. But the big question is, will that convergence lead to actual action? And the 4 areas that I would highlight are first, data protection and privacy, particularly in light of the Schrems II decision in the summer and what is likely to be the kind of sword of Damocles hanging over standard contractual clauses. In fact, there's a hearing today in the Senate Commerce Committee, the full committee, on the future of Privacy Shield, or the future of negotiations of what will come after Privacy Shield. In the United States right now, I think you're seeing a lot more convergence in the direction of European privacy protections. You can see it in Prop 24 that just passed in California. You can see it in the mood in Congress, but we're not there yet. So the question is, how do we create interoperability between the 2 systems that will bridge as we continue to converge? And I wrote a piece about this, and it came out, I think, 2 days ago, about some areas where the United States could codify rights. There are some executive orders that the new Biden administration can make, looking at questions around things like necessity and proportionality and redress, et cetera. So data protection and privacy for personal data is a big one. Second one is antitrust and competition. Obviously, we're going to have a lot of movement on that next week. We're all very interested to see what comes out of the Commission proposal on the Digital Markets Act. In the Biden administration or the incoming administration, there have been indications that they will beef up funding and resources available to the FTC and the DOJ Antitrust Division. Perhaps there's some ground for cooperation there. The third is, of course, the question around responsibility of platforms and speech and liability safe harbors. There is convergence again on this point, but it's become extremely polarized in Washington. I think we're all aware there are two sides of the liability exemptions that are in place. One is allowing platforms to remove content, and the other is that they deem to be harmful disinformation, hate speech using their own prerogative, and the other that it basically exempts them from suits. And as we see, the Republicans are really pushing back on a kind of very broad-ranging free speech argument on exemptions that should allow them to be able to remove content. So even though there's some degree of convergence in the positions between the US and Europe, it's becoming so polarized internally in the United States that it's going to be difficult to get somewhere constructive. And the fourth, and I think this is the area where there's maybe the least current convergence, primarily because of how Washington looks compositionally in Congress, is the digital services tax. That's going to be a really tough nut to crack. Obviously, France is going ahead with its DST. That's going to be noted, obviously, in Washington, but we do have the next 6 months to try to come up with some kind of agreement in the OECD on that. So those are the big four. Tough issues. I think if you don't get those right, it's going to be hard to have the right kind of good feelings in, say, March, April. But those are four areas that we need to focus on. Some areas where I think there's a lot more, let's say, a positive story is in things like, digital resilience around COVID mitigation, COVID management. Obviously, a big priority for the incoming Biden administration, one of the four top priorities. The other one is on the city. I was just virtually at the German Digital Summit last week. I can tell you that the number one theme by far for the Germans was green tech and sustainability, and how to use industrial policy to foster sustainability and climate mitigation by design. And I think that will be met with a lot of agreement in Washington, and also a lot of political will to push things that are kind of convergent in that space. And two final things that I would flag for this round while we're just getting ideas on the table. One is the notion of digital rights. I think it's really important that we start this conversation now. Pilar comes from a state that just passed a charter of digital rights, Spain. The incoming Portuguese presidency of the EU wants to start to draft a charter of digital rights that could be EU-wide. It sounds like an interesting agenda item for President Biden's Summit of Democracies. I think this is a cutting-edge area where democracies need to be considering what kind of rights exist online and how far they should go, particularly as we look at things like new surveillance technologies, automated decision-making, the next level of data processing, data privacy, et cetera. And the final issue that I would flag in this round, just to start, is Brexit. We're going into a space where it's going to be very rocky. I saw yesterday that there's been an extension on adequacy for 6 months, so that personal data can continue to flow to the UK in the interim. But a lot of the questions that are raised regarding bulk surveillance between the US and EU are going to be very similar to those raised between the US and UK. Questions around governance on emerging technologies, questions around industrial data. These are questions that we should be handling in a kind of, if not trilateral US, UK, EU constellation, then even a broader constellation with democracies like-minded states like Canada, Australia, and South Korea, and Japan. So I will stop there. I'm just putting ideas on the table, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Tyson. We now have about 12 minutes for discussion, which is not an awful lot of time, and already a long queue of people who want to take part in the discussion. Just to remind you to use the chat function at the bottom of the screen just to indicate you want to ask a question, because of course we will pull you up both audibly and visibly to ask your question directly. I understand the first person who wants to respond is Peter Linton. Peter Linton, over to you.
Am I on the air?
You're on now, Peter. Over to you.
Yeah, just a great many interesting and important things have been said, and I'm certainly not going to continue beating a very live horse. Let me just make one observation. It is extremely important not to put a flag on antitrust enforcement. And there's always a temptation. But I go back all the way to the IBM case, which was the old original. And all through the intervening years, we have had major enforcement procedures here where the defendant is an American corporation. But most of the plaintiffs have been American corporations. So let's just keep this under control. And let's think about what the law should really look like on both sides. And there is a need for innovation and new thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll take that as a comment, not as a question. I think Hendrik Bourgeois wants to ask a question. Hendrik?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Hendrik Bourgeois. I work for Apple. I had a question for Pilar. Pilar, I wanted to ask you about the comments that Danuta made earlier in the previous session about the need of US-EU cooperation in digital policy. My sense is that this is important, not only because a lot of the conduct that is being looked at and scrutinized is actually global conduct, but also because technology, digital innovation is going to be super important after the recovery from the pandemic to ensure economic growth. And I think that there are a lot of other areas in the world that are looking to regulate the space. I'm thinking Russia, I'm thinking China, Japan, and other countries. And at the end of the day, I wonder if you had any comments on whether or not a cooperation, transatlantic cooperation, is really not also important to promote common standards and Western values in reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Hendrik. So I'd like Pilar you to answer. I think I'll ask also afterwards Tyson to come back on as well. Pilar, over to you, Pilar.
Okay. Yes. I think, hi, Henry, how are you?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you again here. Sorry, I had some problem with my connection. Sorry, there was some problem with my connection. Now I recover. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me, please? Okay,
yes,
okay, excellent.
Yes.
Oh, this is, okay, I'm sorry. So sorry. Well, I'm sorry. I think, yes, I was telling Henry hello, but then Danuta was not the only one. I mean, Danuta insisted that I start saying that this is absolutely essential, but I think it's a sharing, idea, a sharing feeling, sharing need that we all see, that necessity for the collaboration and the deep collaboration, close collaboration with the United States. In this sense, I think I was referring to what extent the pandemic has shown the need for this, has strengthened the need for this collaboration as well. This is for sure. I mean, for the recovery, technologies are essential. Digital, indeed, is one of the lines in which member states has to invest, in order to invest from the recovery funds. So it is clear in the European Union that is one of the real dimensions that all this investment coming from the recovery fund must to be used. So there is no doubt on that. So we have to use that, the convergence in terms of standards and all this. I mentioned that before. There is a unique opportunity stressed by and strength. Sorry for the new situation we are, but also because the new technologies has developed so much that make it more and more clear that this is important that we have this a common approach as far as is possible. And there's many things that can be done. I mean, there's difficulties when it's you mentioned, Tyson, the Digital Service Act. That's clear. But I am quite optimistic because it is for the first time that this is on the table. So many things related to digital. Before, there was a kind of, very the younger brother of everything. And now has been really upgraded. I think that gives us the opportunity to really focus on that and to find solutions, to be innovative. I said at the beginning when I end that it's not just about to restart this relationship, this transatlantic relationship, but to transform in it. I think this is the key point. We have to see it with another, approach, lens, needs for our societies.
Thank you, Pilar. Before I turn over to Tyson, just remind all of you to ask your questions. There are 64 people in this meeting, so I can't imagine questions not forthcoming. And I don't want to hear afterwards people saying, isn't it a pity we didn't raise X, Y, or Z topic? Well, now's your opportunity to raise X, Y, or Z topic. That was my little party speech. And now over to you, Tyson.
Yeah, I mean, the question about standards and maybe even regulatory cooperation is obviously a big one, and it's one that it's the gift that keeps on giving a little bit. I know that there are smarter people on this line, like Bruce Stokes and Stormy Annika Miltner, than me, who have flagged that there have been other fora, the Transatlantic Economic Council, the High-Level Working Group on Jobs and Growth, the TTIP process, et cetera, that we're supposed to address some of these really tough questions, and they're tough for a reason. I would flag two things. One is to consider, again, the constellation and the level. My hope is that in the new administration, and somebody flagged, what about Kamala Harris? Shouldn't we be doing something? That she might have, given her background, also her background as AG and what she did in privacy space, for example, also her committee assignments in the past, also her state and her constituency in the past, a particular interest in maybe taking on some of these issues, at least as a titular kind of coordinator across government, so that you can have this kind of conversation. I did a piece with Marietje Schaake, who's obviously a good friend of TPN, a couple of weeks ago in Lawfare, where we talked about her being perhaps the chair of the Trade and Tech Council, because she has that ability to kind of set agendas within a government, or a vice president has that ability, particularly given that the president-elect is not necessarily as interested in these topics, we have to say. I also think it's important to think in kind of, as somebody mentioned, the state standards bodies, think more multi-stakeholder, think about more coordination and consensus building, and think about open standards that unlock bottlenecks in technologies, that path dependencies that exist. One example that I would flag is the Open Radio Access Network standard for Edge 5G components. This has become a topic of quite acute interest in Washington. How do we kind of emancipate ourselves from walkway equipment, or even from an oligopolistic equipment landscape on 5G? And to the extent that we can look at these kind of possibilities, maybe even, I'm throwing this out there, people will probably clench their pearls, but think about how the United States could, as a state, participate more in the Gaia X protocol development. That might be something that we can think about, because the ultimate aim is to empower citizens and not to get locked into particular relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tyson. Well, I don't have any pearls, so I've not been clutching any pearls. Let's maybe finish off this session then by going back to first principles. I mean, both Pilar and Tyson done an excellent job at diagnosing and dissecting what the issues are, where there are divergences, frankly, let's be blunt about it, but where there's also scope for working together. So we kind of know what the issues are in broad terms. But I'm coming back to a point that Pilar's made more than once now. We have to be innovative. We have to simply not just restore, but transform the relationship, echoing somewhat what Danuta said an hour ago about finding new ways to solve old problems. And Tyson, you were kind of hinting at it just now, but let me finish off by asking you, Pilar and Tyson, to talk a bit about, quite frankly, about how we do transform this relationship. Is it a question of looking at all the existing structures we've used and relied on for the past decades, frankly, both government to government, parliament to parliament, think tank cooperation, groups like this, the TPN. Let's try and be specific about how this transformed relationship should take place. And maybe just give one or two examples, Pilar, just to throw the question back to you. How do we, in your words, how do we transform this relationship? Pilar.
Well, the transforming of the relationship is a matter of mindset to start with. I mean, this is not, you cannot transform anything. And so you must be really very much aware that you are not, you are in another era. I mean, to tell you the truth, I mean, you see the degree of digitalization we are now, and we were, but you see also the fact and the let's say there's so many different things with such a precise way we couldn't see because the pandemic, because the situation we have, you know, and the things we have to confront in the future. This is very clear that we have to change our mindset, and that's implied that two regions that they share values, and then they must be extremely much together. I mean, it was Wendy saying that it is better not to go alone, but better than to go alone, be together, you know, to be apart, be together. So this is very clear. That was a mantra, but it wasn't a real mindset. I would say that, you know, apart from different structure we can use and all these things, this is more specifically, and I'm not now in a situation to really go into that, but I think the mindset thing is absolutely fundamental, and will determine if we go in this way of transforming, on this way of business as usual, also in the transatlantic relationship.
Thank you, Pilar. Final word to you, Tyson. Do you agree with Pilar that we have to change the mindset? And could you give maybe an example how a change in mindset might change things?
Of course, I agree with Pilar. The mindset change is necessary, and you know, I think it's happening. I would just say that we need to watch what we think about the digital economy, because it's built on the kind of first principle of openness, and we're going into a period where a lot of what we're seeing is not reinforcing the principle of openness. So, you know, if you look back at the Industrial Revolution, late 19th century, a lot of concurrent instruments, institutions, unions, the social welfare state, others, even the regulatory state emerged to kind of counterbalance these massive productivity gains brought about by industrialization, and a lot of them mimicked a lot of the kind of management philosophies and organizational philosophies that they saw in the private sector. And my question is, are we doing the same thing now? You know, we have all these new companies, we have this massive productivity gain because of the digital economy. Do the instruments that we use in the public sector match those, and are they serving our people well and this principle of openness, and do we still think that this is a first principle that we want to preserve? I personally think it is. I think that specifically in this Euro-Atlantic relationship it is, but I think we really need to ask that question.
Thank you. Well, let's leave that on, Tyson. Thank you very much. Well, our half hour is up. 30 minutes have just flown by, and there's still many unanswered questions, but we have to move on with the program. So thank you to Pilar, thank you to Tyson, and I now hand back to Jeffries.